Oh, Riku. What's up? What are you doing here?
I'm here to see a movie.
What movie?
I'm not sure. Honestly, they've just been in black and white with no sound. It's weird.
What, like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari?
No, like someone took a hammer to the projector.
Then why are you watching it?
I don't know.
Whatever, I'll join you. Better than whatever I was just doing.
Which was...
I don't know. Oh, hey, I played this last year.
You did?
Yeah, Tools of Destruction. I marathoned the HD Ratchet and Clank games beginning of 2022.
Tell me about it.
Okay. I wanted to play Rift Apart really badly in 2021. I didn't for two main reasons. One, I didn't have a PS5 at the time, and two, I hadn't played any of the PS3 games. Yeah, I know you don't need to play the previous entries, but as someone who legitimately really loves this series, I wanted to play all of the main games before diving into the newest one. And after playing Miles Morales at the end of 2021, I decided to start 2022 off by continuing my Insomniac streak. Tools of Destruction is a really solid entry in the Ratchet & Clank series, but it's a step down from Up Your Arsenal. I'd probably put it just under Going Commando for me personally. As some of you may know, this game marked the start of the Future Trilogy, a sub-series of mainline Ratchet & Clank games that had one continuous story dealing with Ratchet's race and Clank's true purpose. While the story is pretty good, there are some very major retcons made to the lore that made it very hard to fully engross myself in it. The direction also takes a turn away from the original PS2 trilogy, focusing less on satirizing capitalism and focusing more on the characters. I know some fans don't like this change, but I personally didn't mind it. I love these characters and I don't mind seeing them explored more. As for the gameplay, it's very solid, but much like with many games released in the early days of the PS3 and 360, it just feels like an HD PS2 game. This goes for the graphics too, as while it's definitely pretty and the art direction is immaculate, it never surpasses what Up Your Arsenal was able to do. I also ran into a number of glitches during my playtime. It was never game-breaking, but it makes it feel janky and it adds to the HD PS2 game idea. Quest for Booty is a fun little side thing. It has all the same problems Tools of Destruction had, but it also experiments a bit more mechanically. You know what the best way to describe this game is, though? You know those missions in some games where they take away a tool you've been using the entire time? The floodless levels in Mario Sunshine, or heck, the sections in Ratchet & Clank games where you just play as Ratchet sans Clank? Well, it's that for 3 hours. It really makes you realize Clank does play an important role in these games. You know, I kinda hate the PS3 controller. Like, if I use it for a long time, I'll get used to it, but the second I pick it up after having not touched it in forever, it just feels bad. Honestly, the PS4 controller is the first PlayStation controller I actually like. The rest just kinda suck. Ratchet & Clank Future, A Crack in Time is fantastic. It feels like a very natural evolution of the look, feel, and gameplay I know the series for. It doesn't feel like there are as many worlds as there were in past games, but it makes up for it by having these worlds feel larger and more packed with stuff to do, as well as the inclusion of actual space travel. Rather than just picking a planet from a menu, you actually get to fly around space to get to your next location, allowing you to battle things out in your ship, stop and explore various moons, and complete side quests. The Clank segments are also the best in the series. The various time-based puzzles are creative and appropriately mind-boggling, especially the optional ones. While it doesn't top Up Your Arsenal for me, it's definitely right next to it. I did feel like it was starting to overstay its welcome towards the end, but I can't really tell you if that's because the game was just a bit too long, or if it's because I tried to go for everything I could. Hey, did you know you can't record a PS3 game with a capture card natively? There's this thing called High Bandwidth Digital Content Protection, or HDCP for short, which prevents you from recording things, so you can't just record an entire movie off of a Blu-ray or Netflix or something. On a modern system like the Switch, it just automatically turns on and off depending on the app you're using. With the PS3, however, they just have it on for the entire system. Normally I record my own footage, but for these games I had to download some. There is a workaround, but don't you think that might just be not worth the hassle for a system 16 years out of date? On the PS4, they wised up and let you turn HDCP off, but it's done manually instead, meaning you have to trudge through the settings each and every time you want to watch a movie. Oh, but it's been 9 years since the PS4. Surely they would make it automatic on the PS5. Nope, still gotta dig through menus to do all this stuff. Isn't that just neato? It's been a while since I've had so much fun with a game I'm so confused about. When Rift Apart was announced, I was excited, but my friend, One Grave Saka, said he hadn't loved a Ratchet & Clank game in years. At the time, all I had played were the original PS2 trilogy, but even if the later games were weaker, there was a part of me that felt like maybe he was just being nostalgia blind. Now that I played Into the Nexus, I realized there were like 12 years in which the only things Ratchet & Clank to release were spin-offs, a remake that, while solid, was severely lacking in the remake department, as well as having the worst character development for the main characters, and a single mainline entry that somehow feels both half and full-assed. When I booted Into the Nexus up, I immediately noticed two things wrong. One, for some reason, the Ratchet model in this game looked worse than the one in Crack in Time, and two, the movement felt a lot clunkier. But then I kept playing and I realized the environments were absolutely beautiful. Then I noticed how there were only 12 gold bolts in the entire game, which is not a lot at all. But the further I got, I realized the new weapons and gadgets were a ton of fun! And then the game ended. The only way I can describe Into the Nexus is flaccid. There's so much about it that I really, really like, and for the most part, it outweighs the negatives. But then it just ends, and like, I'm not even sure if I'm disappointed. I'm not really sure how I feel about it at all. Rift Apart serves not only as proof that Insomniac still genuinely does care and believe in this franchise, but it's also the best Ratchet & Clank game, period. Prior to going into this, I was nervous about burnout, seeing as I just played 4 games in the series, but almost as soon as I booted it up, all of that tiredness just evaporated. There is so much love and care put into everything, from the witty character dialogue, to the beautiful landscapes, to the pitch-perfect gameplay. I just love everything about this game. Kinda. I have 1 or 2 gripes here or there, mainly with some glitches and the character named Glitch. Her gameplay sections are fun, but everything about it feels far removed from everything else. She has this storyline that kinda goes places, but doesn't really, and no one ever acknowledges she exists until the game decides you're gonna play as her. Outside of that, I really have no problems with this game. It's huge, it's beautiful, the weaponry is very solid. Rivet and Kit are fantastic additions to the series that I hope to see more of, and overall it makes me feel confident that not every first-party PlayStation game is gonna be a gritty, cinematic, story-focused third-person adventure game. As long as Ratchet & Clank sticks around, there will always be a goofy, lighthearted, and most importantly, fun series I can play on my PlayStation. After having just played 6 of their games in a row, I feel comfortable in saying Insomniac is right next to Remedy on my favorite Western developers list. This game is incredibly hard. I don't know what it is exactly, but Curse of the Moon 2 is way harder than I remember the first game being. The first episode is a ton of fun, with great level design, boss design, and fun characters to play around with. However, by the time I got to episode 3, I was growing tired of replaying the exact same levels over and over again. Yeah, more characters unlocked that helped freshen up the run, but I just didn't want to keep going. Great game, but it's just too much for me, I guess. I backed Bloodstained back in, 2015? Either way, I'm only now getting around to playing it. Before it released, I was nervous people wouldn't treat it fairly due to games like Mighty No. 9 and Yooka-Laylee coming along and either being a dumpster fire or simply not living up to expectations. So I was happy to see the game is thought of very favorably. And now I can say I too really like it. While it's not as good as Aria of Sorrow or Symphony of the Night, this is still a great entry in the Metroidvania genre. There are some glaring issues with it, such as the performance in that giant tower area and the graphics on Switch, but I'm sure that the eventual sequel will fix these issues while improving upon the foundation Ritual of the Night sets. Idita is a good game on Monark. Quick summary. Monark is an average game that's enjoyable enough to justify playing. That is until you get towards the end of the game and it just pumps it full of some of the worst padding I've seen in a hot minute. I was able to have fun with it, but I'm not going to recommend this game to anybody. Play it if you want, I don't care. Doom 64 is great. I've always loved Doom, and now I've finally gotten around to playing this often overlooked entry. It's not the best of the classic Doom trilogy, however. I think the first game is still the best. 64 is a great FPS, but a lot of its level design is just throwing a bunch of enemies at you. It's fine, but I prefer the more exploration-based levels. Plus, while I understand the intentions with the game's soundtrack, it's just not what I expect when I play Doom. Babies Crying is cool, but I want to kill demons while listening to whatever metal songs the composer ripped off this time. Despite me blaming it for the popularization of modern gaming hipsterism, I do love Scott Pilgrim. I absolutely love the books for their lovable characters and depth. I really like the movie for being a celebration of video games, and I really like the game because it's a genuinely good beat 'em up. I never beat it a decade ago, so I'm glad I was finally able to do that. Good game with great music. Hey, did you know that Scott Pilgrim isn't actually a good person? If you did, then you have something called media literacy. Triangle Strategy is a fantastic game that I'm still loving long after beating it. Idita is a good game on it, and my opinions haven't changed since making it. If you want a great successor to Final Fantasy Tactics, this is absolutely something you should pick up. Kirby and the Forgotten Land isn't just another fantastic Kirby game. It's also the best 3D Kirby game. That's not saying a lot, but that doesn't mean it's not fantastic. I feel like everything that can be said has been said, so I'm just gonna mention my one gripe with it. I understand the move to 3D requires reworking the entire Kirby formula, but one of the things I missed in this game was the expansive move list each copy ability had. While I do love it and am confident I'll love whatever the next 3D game is, I do hope they're able to achieve that same level of move variety in the future. Happy 30th birthday, Kirby! Kirby? Yo, the Kaito Files is great! Anyone who's played Lost Judgment needs to play this. While the combat styles are just lifted right out of Yakuza 0, I absolutely feel like I got my money's worth out of this DLC. Not only does it prove to me that Kaito can act as the protagonist if Yagami really is out of the series, but it also has one of my personal favorite final boss fights in Yakuza. Now just wait for Like a Dragon 8! That rhymed. Wait, what rhymed? Why'd I write that? Actually, I don't know. What rhymed? Like a Dragon 8? What was I talking about? It goes without saying that the internet has really blown how good Final Fantasy VII is out of proportion. But that's not to say it's not good. Hell, it's great. And I can honestly see why it ended up being as hyped up as it is. The combat is great. The story is great. The characters are good. And it was clearly a massive step up for the series back when it released. What I was really surprised by, however, is how much I ended up liking Sephiroth. I've seen him in so many other properties, and I just ended up never really caring about him much. I've played Crisis Core, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and even attempted to play Final Fantasy VII in the past, but I never really got why Sephiroth is a good villain. Having finished it now, I realized it's 100% from the Jaws effect they were going for. It takes a minute, but seeing what Sephiroth causes and how people react to it is what makes him so good. Sephiroth doesn't get a ton of characterization, nor do you see him doing much, but that's what makes him so much cooler than the interpretations where he's actively doing things. Him manipulating everything to his favor is what makes him so intimidating. I also really love his relationship with Cloud, how he thinks of him like an amusing toy, while Cloud thinks of him as the source of all of his problems. Seeing how fans have warped the perception of this game is so plain to see now that I've actually played it. It's not the best Final Fantasy, but I totally get why it's held in such high regard. INTERmission is a solid expansion, but it ultimately feels like it was made just to convince people who already had the game on PS4 to buy a PS5 and pay $20. It's nice to return to this game after 2 years and be reminded of everything I loved about it though. The expansion of various themes in the original FF7, such as classism, propaganda, and nationalism. The fantastic implementation of the ATB system into an action-based combat system. Hell, they even went and made the Fort Condor minigame infinitely better than what it was in the PS1 version. INTERmission doesn't feel like a necessity, but it's a nice return to a reimagining that I immensely respect. Also, I think I like the remake more than the original game. It's not perfect, but I like what it's doing a lot. Don't kill me! Yeah, I don't think it takes much to see why I play this next. I don't have much to say about Remind. It's definitely an improvement on the disappointing original ending, but it doesn't fix the core issues with it. Kingdom Hearts 3's ending is disappointing due to how unambitious it feels, how it sloppily wraps up 9 games worth of overly complex story, how it uses Deus Ex Machina after Deus Ex Machina. At least it includes 14 new super bosses. Can't beat any of them, but it's cool that they're here. As someone who isn't super into rhythm games, I really enjoyed Melody of Memory for a few reasons. I found the gameplay really fun and satisfying. It acts as a fantastic recap for the series up to this point, while also working as a solid epilogue to the Darkseeker saga. The music, as always, is incredible, and I'm happy Yoko Shimomura got a check. However, while there's 150 songs in the game, I found there were a few strange omissions that surprised me. Not to mention, I felt like there were some missed opportunities. For instance, the remix of Calling from Dream Drop Distance is in the game, but not the remix of Twister. None of the remixes of Simple and Clean are here. One of the 3 song types is boss battles, yet there are only 4 of them in the entire game. There are songs that are ripped straight from Disney movies, such as The Circle of Life, but there are only 5 of them total. There's a ton here, but I can't help but feel like they could have done a lot more. Imagine if they included all of the songs from the Disney movies that are represented in Kingdom Hearts. A boss battle for every final boss and super boss with a unique theme. At least include Twister. I really can't tell you why I decided to boot up Sonic Adventure 2 again. It's been like a decade since I last played it, and I just got a random urge. You know, the more I think about it, it's probably because of all of the Sonic Frontiers marketing that was going on at the time. Playing through SA2 again was a really nice revisit to one of my childhood favorites, as well as a good reminder on why I don't think this is the best Sonic game despite what many say. Playing as Sonic, Shadow, Rouge, and Knuckles is a blast, but Tails and Eggman are legitimately the worst part. They're a worse version of Gamma from Sonic Adventure 1 in almost every way. They're clunkier, they're less fun to control, the levels are plotting and tedious. Knuckles and Rouge make improvements in a lot of areas, such as level design, but I never liked the fact that you can only hunt down one emerald piece at a time. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back in my opinion. Only Sonic and Shadow are genuine improvements across the board. Oh, and the Chao Garden, of course. I actually understood it this time, and I was able to get both the Hero and Dark Gardens. Just wish it didn't take so damn long for a Chao to become an adult. Here's hoping Sonic Frontiers is good. At the time of writing this, the marketing for that game has been a roller coaster. 2 years later, I finally get around to finishing off the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection, and I dare you to guess why I decided to play it right after Sonic Adventure 2. While I do think Galaxy 2 is a better game, in a lot of ways I prefer Galaxy 1. A lot of the concepts feel so much more novel, and it feels like there's more personality to it. I'd like to say that I've now 100%ed the 3D All-Stars collection, but until I go back and complete Galaxy again as Luigi, I can only say I've completed 3/4 of it. Why did they not include Galaxy 2 in this collection? So in preparation for Bayonetta 3 actually releasing, I finally went back and finished my replay of the first 2 Bayonetta games. There was like a 4-year gap in between replaying them, but I did it, and on stream too. To me, Bayonetta 2 is my favorite of the pair, but I can see why some might prefer the first. Bayo 2 doesn't feel as well balanced due almost exclusively to the Umbran climax. That thing is practically broken at times. But that's why I prefer 2. It is broken, but it's a ton of fun as a result. Not to mention the weapons are all fun to use in their own right, and even just moving around feels great. As I'm writing this, Bayonetta 3 hasn't come out yet, but it's easily one of my most anticipated releases this year. Hopefully it can be the best in the series, both in my opinion and in the fandoms. Oh, you sweet summer child, you have no idea what was coming when you wrote this. Initially, I wasn't going to include this game because I didn't play it much at all, but after Jason David Frank passed away this year, I felt the need to go back and add it. I grew up on Mighty Morphin and Dino Thunder, though I did dabble in other series like Time Force, Ninja Storm, and SPD. I finally came back into Power Rangers with the Boom comics, and trust me, they're fantastic. Battle for the Grid is in the same vein as those comics, being aimed more towards the fans that grew up with Power Rangers. However, while the comics can still easily be enjoyed by kids, this game with its touch of death, even against AI, will probably be brutal for the youngins and the casual fighting game fan. I would know, I am one. But despite that, I still enjoyed what I played. The story mode is an abridged, remixed version of the famous Shattered Grid comic storyline, which, while definitely better in the comic, is worth playing if only to hear the returning voice actors bring it to life. Rest in peace, Jason David Frank. May the power protect you. Sadly, I wasn't able to get around to making a video on iKnee. Things just got really busy around that time, and I had 2 pretty major videos in the works. Not to mention, I got COVID and was just out of commission for a week. Regardless, nirvanA Initiative is genuinely fantastic and better in most areas than the original game. The biggest improvement is in the gameplay. Not only do Somniums feel less trial and error-y, but they're also much more creative and puzzle-like, while still feeling like they employ dream logic. Outside of the Somniums, the VR investigations are a lot of fun, though frankly underutilized. The story incorporates a lot of elements from Uchikoshi's Zero Escape series, which helps make the game feel more distinct from its predecessor, while also just making me more engaged in the narrative itself. I will say it gets pretty dang confusing towards the end, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are plot holes I missed as a result. The story also isn't as strong thematically as the first. The original felt very focused on the theme of love, thoroughly exploring it by the end. INE's main theme is halves, and while there are great moments, it never feels as though it's fully explored, or that it connects everything in the game into a neat bow. The translation is also rougher than I remember the first being. I found a lot more typos and grammatical errors, with the worst offender being a minor character introduced towards the end named Marco. In his initial scene, the text properly translates his name as M-A-R-C-O. But in every subsequent scene, it's translated in Romaji as Maruko. And I know his name is supposed to be Marco because you can unlock concept art of him that has the name written in English right next to him. I will say, this has been fixed in a patch, but it was like months later and I was well done with the game at that point. Despite all of this, I genuinely think this is the better of the two Somnium Files, and it easily ranks up there with Virtue's Last Reward as some of Uchikoshi's best work. Last year, Monster Hunter Rise continued the trend of every single new Monster Hunter release being the new best one in my opinion. I'm not going to count Sunbreak in that competition because it's an expansion rather than a new game, but it certainly can feel like it at times. It really is the massive expansion they marketed it as being, reintroducing tons of classic monsters and a handful of new ones that are all a challenge in their own right. The two locales, Jungle and Citadel, add some nice variety to the game, with the Citadel probably being my new favorite area in Rise. I didn't play Iceborne, so I can't really compare Sunbreak to that, but the way I see it, Sunbreak is an excellent expansion, if only because it added back my favorite monster, Gormagala. It's been about 5 or so months since Xenoblade 3 released, and I am still itching to return to it. Is it perfect? Hell no. The first 5 chapters are all god tier, but chapters 6 and 7's pacing prevent the game from truly being perfect. Despite taking 5 years, the story ironically feels more rushed than Xenoblade 2's, a game that took half that time. However, despite the rushed third act, Xenoblade 3 soars in practically every other category. The combat is so much fun, the characters are insanely lovable and all given time to shine. The themes and tones are pitch perfect, and once you get to the actual ending, it all just comes together beautifully. The second I started to cry while watching the final scene before the credits, I knew that I loved this game and everything it stands for. It's so utterly amazing, and I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 might be my new favorite game. Once all the DLC is out, I'll have to do some serious thinking about whether I prefer the first game or this. I love Monolith Soft so much. Xenoblade 3 could use a sprint button though. Man, what is up with the HD 2D art style? It's just beautiful and perfect, yet they've really been churning them out lately, and so far they've all been great with no sign of slowing down. Live Alive is the first HD 2D remake to release, and I can absolutely see why this game is so popular despite never receiving a localization. The idea of picking any character and watching their stories play out is such a great concept, and I don't think any game has come close to doing it as well as Live Alive. This is what Octopath Traveler wanted to do, but where it failed is in having all 8 stories take place at the same time and having them all team up, despite never accounting for that in their narratives. Not to mention the lack of any proper interaction between them all. Hopefully Octopath 2 fixes those issues, but for now, Live Alive stands as the shining example of how to do this concept, while also having some genuinely incredible music. I love you, Yoko Shimomura! Soul Hackers 2 is a game that people either like or hate, and I understand why. I Did It is a good game on it, so if you liked my complete thoughts on it, you can go watch that. As for now, months after release, I feel as though Soul Hackers 2 ended up just being a drop in the bucket. I don't think it failed per se, but I doubt Atlus is happy with how things turned out. The updates since, like the addition of faster battle speed and a sprint button that required them to completely alter the purpose of a skill, makes it seem like the devs weren't 100% sure what they even wanted to do with the game, or at the very least what would work. I still think it's a good game, but I do hope Atlus learns from its missteps. I don't want this to be the death of the SMT spinoff. Splatoon 3 is good, but the campaign falls into the same trap as Splatoon 2's. Much like how Splatoon 2's Octo Canyon felt like a watered-down version of Splatoon 1's Octo Valley, Splatoon 3's Return of the Mammalians feels like a watered-down version of Splatoon 2's Octo Expansion DLC. It hits every beat at the exact same spots, but the narrative flair is lacking in comparison to its template. This isn't to say Return of the Mammalians isn't good, it's great. The problem is that it revealed to me a potential pattern with the Splatoon series, where they'll come up with something phenomenal, only to just do it again, but nowhere near as good. Oh yeah, this is a multiplayer game. I'll be honest, I didn't really get into Splatoon 3's multiplayer in the same way I did Splatoon 1 and 2. There was the question of whether or not this game warranted being a sequel as opposed to a second DLC pack, and while I feel there's enough incremental changes to warrant it being a new game, I just didn't gel with it in the same way. Maybe things will change when the Off the Hook DLC comes out. Maybe I just want more Pearl and Marina. I love those two lesbians. God, they're great. Best game, 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 big. I genuinely cannot express how dog shit this game's story is. Like, oh my god. It overrides all of the goodwill it had going. Combat is easily the best in this series for me, feeling not only incredibly balanced, but also just the most fun. So much of this game is packed to the brim. There are like 15 different weapons, each with their own demon you can mix and match at any time. The main campaign is the longest it's ever been in a Bayonetta game, with each level also having a challenge version you can unlock by collecting the 3 Umbran tiers in each level. There are 3 different types of currency that each serves a unique purpose, from buying items and accessories to leveling up to buying cosmetics. For the first time in this series, there is a second playable character in the main campaign that actually plays completely differently, acting as the Nero to Bayonetta's Dante. The levels, while a lot emptier and uglier, offer the most variety in terms of finding secrets and just stuff to do. There's an entire stealth minigame that frankly is bad, but it's cool that it's here regardless. The second phase of every boss fight becomes a unique minigame where you control an unleashed form of one of Bayonetta's demons. The game is packed and it does so much of it right. And then the ending kicks in and it just... Up to this point, I was able to forgive practically every shortcoming the game had. The Jean stealth sections are bad, but they're short and I can forget about them. There's not much story for like 75% of the game, but I can forgive it because each universe has its own cool what-if scenario with a dope-ass Bayonetta variant to go with it. There are only 3 Viola levels total, but... Actually, no, that was a problem I had even before the ending. She really needed more levels. She needed more everything. Regardless, the vast majority of the game's problems I can forget about. But the awful ending just kills all of that. It forces plot and character progression that, while I don't think it's an impossible thing to get there, is never earned nor even attempted to build towards. The characters make stupid decisions constantly because they don't know how to write ultra-powerful characters losing. Retcons are made haphazardly and are never explained, expecting you to just accept it as is. It feels like Platinum wanted this game to be a number of things, but in trying to do everything, it succeeded at little. With the ending being such a dumpster fire, it undoes everything it did right. I want to love this game, but I just can't. While not as well balanced as Bayo 1 or 3, I think Bayonetta 2 is still my favorite. It's the most consistently quality, and it has the best Bayo design bar none. I have never seen a game where the story mattered less be ruined by its story. Fuck this game. Oh my god. I feel the best way to explain my thoughts on Sonic Frontiers is to say that it is the best 7 out of 10 I have played all year. I love the writing, the general formula, and the general approach, but the execution is rough around the edges, basically everywhere. However, this is the first Sonic game since Generations that feels like there's genuine love and ambition being put into it. This is what I want Sonic to be, from its pretty great character writing to its good story with dumb anime action to the addicting gameplay loop. However, the boring environments, abysmal pop-in, and poor production value put into the game's cutscenes and presentation keep it from being anything more than a 7. This is the first time in over a decade the future of Sonic has looked bright. I just hope they can keep this up and further improve on what's here. It's not my favorite, but God of War Ragnarok is probably the best made game I've played all year. People like to crap on it, saying it's just another movie game like The Last of Us, but while I would agree that it's in that camp, I'd also argue that both 2018 and Ragnarok are the most game of that camp. There's so much content in Ragnarok, and all of it is polished to a sheen. I was able to go hours without activating a cutscene just by doing side content. The real problems don't start to show themselves until a few hours in, however. God of War actively refuses to not hold your hand when you're in a battle and get a status ailment, or you're solving a puzzle. Characters are too helpful, and it gets either annoying or anger-inducing when you're just trying to play the game. The other problem I have is with the ending. Without spoiling much, once Ragnarok, the event not the game, starts properly, it feels like they're rushing to get through it. Characters who barely got any focus early on become hyper important for one moment in particular so they can wrap up a plot thread. It feels like the desire to shove what was clearly supposed to be 2 games worth of story into one resulted in certain characters and plot points being rushed or to become nothing more than a plot device. Overall, the game is great and a fantastic send-off to the Norse era, but you can really feel the damage the story took by forcing what was supposed to be a second and third acts into a second half. This game is delightful. Link's Awakening is my favorite handheld Zelda game, and this remake is probably the definitive version of it. Probably. I hesitate to say it for sure for one reason. The performance is rough. While it's fine most of the time, you can just feel the frame rate chugging in a few areas, and I can't really tell you why. This feels like a game that shouldn't be that demanding, yet here we are. Regardless, it's a great game, one of my favorite Zeldas. I really hope we get a remake of the Oracle games at some point. Now then, let's end the year off with a return to a PSP classic, and the only entry in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII that people generally agree is good. Unlike the FF7 remake, Crisis Core Reunion is more of a remaster. More of a near replicant version 1.22 than a Link's Awakening HD. While this version of the game is confirmed to take place in the remake timeline, in a lot of ways it feels more in line with the original Final Fantasy VII, with things like the designs of characters and locations to even the general vibe. But it makes sense, as all this game is really doing is taking the original and giving it new character models, some touched up combat, better textures, and a new dub that makes use of the 7 remake cast. And with that, we arrive at the elephant in the room, Zack's new voice. In the lead up to the game's release, I was concerned about Caleb Pierce's performance. What little we hear in the remake sounded genuinely bad, though what little more we hear in INTERmission sounded a lot better. I am willing to give this new guy a shot. The problem is that Rick Gomez's performance is just so iconic and ingrained into the character. He made Zack a cool, lovable dork who struggled to remain optimistic in spite of the tragedy befalling him and his friends, made his eventual betrayal by the company he believed to be just all the more devastating. Caleb, on the other hand, sounds way dorkier with very little of the cool factor. The entire first half of the game, the characterization is just entirely off, and frankly, the performance is just bad at times. However, once you get to the latter half and Zack's story truly begins, Caleb surprised me with how he was able to nail the moments he needed to. While Zack remains the only recast in the remake series I think has a worse voice than the original, I'm somewhat more confident in what Caleb will do in Rebirth. Hopefully, he'll improve his performance and really make the character his own. Now for the other elephant in the room. Genesis sucks! He sucks so hard! Screw Gatch, your self-insert sucks! Shut the hell up about Loveless! I better not see you in Rebirth or whatever the hell the final entry in the remake series is called!
Jeez, you played a lot of games this year.
Yeah, I did. Convenient how everything they showed was a game I played.
You know, I played some of those games. I'd love to have talked with you about what I thought about them as... Well, what now?
I don't know. We got the P3P and P4G ports coming up.
Bro, shut up about that.
What? I'm just saying.